Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and happy 2020, everybody. It's finally here. It's a new year, it's a new start, and of course, it's a new growing season. So in today's episode, we're talking all about choosing seeds to grow, because I want to really help you guys get set up for success this year for your garden. So today's episode is going to be a bit of a mini training to get you off to the right start this year. So let's dig in. So when choosing seeds to grow, it can be really easy to just buy all the things or want to buy all the things. But that can actually lead to somewhat of an overwhelmed situation, especially if you're a new gardener. And the last thing that you really want is to be overwhelmed. And I've said it before on the podcast, and I'll say it again, is to start small if you're a new gardener and just try one or two things to grow, or a small garden box that you're trying to grow in, because that way you can sort of start building those skills before trying to grow more produce, because it's easy to get overwhelmed. And I know that's something that people don't really talk about a lot. So I'm going to kind of preempt the training with some new gardener watch outs, right? And my first piece of advice as a new gardener is don't take on too much in one go. Because everything that you're going to plant is going to require some level of care or maintenance throughout the growing season. And those things include like weeding, watering, feeding, harvesting, pruning, picking off pests, those kind of things. And it can be real easy to get overrun, when you've got so many other things going on, right? I work full time. I know most of my listeners work full time. You've got a busy life, you've got a job to go to, you've got a mortgage to pay, maybe you've got a family to look after, dogs to walk or take to, dog training and stuff. There's a lot going on in your life, and growing too much can mean that, you can get overrun with weeds or not water because you've got too many things going on, or maybe, you can even let a harvest go to waste because you're so busy you're not able to keep on top of it. So start with a small garden of plants that that you and your family love, and you can always expand and go bigger from there. So let's get stuck into some of the things that you might need to be thinking about when you're choosing seeds. And I've kind of got a list here of kind of things that go through my mind, and not just my mind, some other gardeners as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this list as a free download that you can get your hands on by clicking the link in the description for this podcast. So you don't need to necessarily write it down, but if you want to, that's great. So I'm going to read off this list first, and then we're going to dive into what these things mean. Okay? So the first one is, do you or your family want to eat it? The next is, do you or your family enjoy eating it? Number 3, does it have a great flavour? Number 4, is it nutritious or a superfood? Number 5, does it suit the growing space that you have? Number 6, does the maintenance of growing it fit your or your family's lifestyle? Next one, does it have resistance to pests in your area? Does it have resistance to diseases in your area? Is it high yielding? Can it provide continual harvests over a season? Is it perennial or is it self-seeding? Is it native to your area? Will it tolerate the climate of your area? Will it be able to produce in my growing season? Does it have ornamental value such as pretty flowers, leaves or fruits? Or does it provide ornamental value when dormant, such as coloured bark or leaves? Okay, so that's quite a list, and you can see there's a lot of different questions that are in there, and I want you to kind of think about those questions in terms of your current situation. You might have different things to think about when you're wanting to choose seeds. So let's start from the top and talk about these. Do you or your family want to eat it? Okay, so there's obviously diversity in what people like to eat within, families or people, living together in the same household. And for example, my husband loves Brussels sprouts. I cannot stand Brussels sprouts. So he might really want to eat all the Brussels sprouts in the world, but I don't want to eat any of them. And that can, really take up a lot of space. So you really want to think about, is this something that not only, you guys want to eat it, but do you enjoy eating it? Because you don't want to dedicate growing space, particularly if you've got a small garden, to something that you guys don't really enjoy eating. I've got a friend who doesn't like tomatoes at all. So her growing tomatoes is kind of pointless because she doesn't really enjoy eating them. And she's not going to grow those to give away to somebody necessarily, because she doesn't really have the space for that. So she trades out the tomatoes for something that she does enjoy eating. So really have a think about whether you want to eat it and if you really enjoy eating it. And I'll go back to what I said, if you're a new gardener, start with the plants that you know that you love. So take a look at what you're eating on a regular basis in terms of veggies and start there. It might be salads. You might be a regular salad buyer and you want to try growing your own because the amount of E. coli outbreaks is kind of freaking you out. Maybe that's something that you want to try. So make a list of what you want to eat and what you really enjoy eating it to help kind of narrow down those things that you're wanting to grow. The next question is, does it have a great flavour? Now, you might not know if it has a great flavour. Maybe it's a variety that you have never seen or heard of before. Maybe you saw, Japanese wasabi radish, for instance, or maybe the elephant tusk eggplant, and you thought, oh, they look really neat, but you don't really know what they taste like. For example, we're growing bitter melon this year, and we've never eaten that before. So that's something that we don't know what that's going to be like, but certainly the name bitter melon kind of gives some of it away, that there is going to be a bit of a bitter flavour. But one of the great things with living in this day and age is you can Google that, right? Or use the web search browser of your choice, or search engine of your choice, and you can kind of look up some of these things. So I've got a list of varieties of vegetables that I love to grow because of their flavour alone, and there are lots and lots of resources that are available that have information about how things taste and recipes to use them in. The same thing goes with, is it nutritious or a superfood? If you're kind of interested in healthy eating anyway, you'll find that there's different foods that kind of come and go in trends or fashions. Like everything was about kale a couple of years ago. Now it's all about berries. Maybe I might be kind of out with the times on that too. But you'll see that there's kind of trends that come and go. Bitter melon's another one that's kind of a trendy quote unquote superfood. And ultimately growing your own produce and homegrown vegetables are really always going to be the most nutritious anyway. But having things that are nutrient dense or a superfood is kind of quite a popular thing right now. So you might want to do a bit of research to find out if what you're looking at growing is going to be a superfood. I recently looked at ordering It was some Asian greens that were meant to have more calcium than a glass of milk. So that was kind of interesting to read about. And I don't drink a lot of milk, for various reasons, most notably the lactose issues. But that means that I kind of try to get calcium from other sources, and I like a lot of leafy green vegetables, so this was something that really piqued my interest, and that was called komatsuma, Komatsuma, spinach mustard. So that was kind of cool. It was not only a spinach substitute, but it was also something that was kind of nutritious. So those are things to really kind of think about, especially if they're really important to you and your family, and you're looking at really living a more healthier lifestyle by growing your own produce. It's kind of do a bit of research to find out if it's the right one for you to be growing, because there is differences between plants. So for example, within the squash family, different varieties of squash have different levels of beta carotene in them. They have different colours which provide different nutrients. So that's something for you to kind of research a bit more about if that is something that interests you. If it isn't something that interests you, with it being nutritious or a superfood, then don't worry about that being part of the criteria for you to decide whether or not you're going to grow the seeds, right? It's that easy. And the great thing about this list, and any of the lists that you might find online about when you're trying to choose seeds, is you can really pick and choose the ones that mean something to you, because it's your garden, right? It's not my garden. Like, my garden's very different to your garden. It's very different to the next gardener's garden. So that's one of the wonderful things about growing your own food, is you can really make it your own. The next question that I had on here is, does it suit the growing space that you have? So if you've got a small garden or a small backyard where you can grow veggies, or a small space, then you might need to think about growing compact or bush varieties. And you can often search by compact, bush, or even container varieties, because they tend to be smaller when you're looking for your seeds. And that's something that's very important if you've got limited space. I used to have a small courtyard garden, or courtyard yard, where I used to rent a little house back in the UK. And that thing was mostly shade, and I had to kind of move containers around the courtyard to get the light to be able to grow. And I actually found it was easier to grow a couple of containers out in the front yard if I wanted some veggies, because that got a lot more sun. But that really meant that I had to really think about the space that I had available and what plants would grow in there. So if I was to grow a courgette or a zucchini, I didn't want a trailing one. I wanted one that was going to be small and compact, and would produce more in that small space. And salads and things, I grew more kind of cut and come again varieties of salad leaves than those kind of hearting lettuces like romaine, because I could get a lot more in that space by growing that way. So that's something to consider, is, does it suit the growing space that you have? Also, if you want to grow things like a squash or a pumpkin, they have long trailing vines, and you need to think about, is this something that I can really grow in this space? Because where those vines are growing, you're not necessarily going to be able to grow anything else in that space. Same with things like watermelon or melon, unless you're going to grow it up and over a trellis, which leads me into the next question of, does the maintenance of growing it fit you or your family's lifestyle? So let's take the example with the squash or the melon. You might need to regularly go ahead and tie those vines into that trellis to help keep it growing there and not growing all over the soil. You might also need to do some other maintenance, such as weeding. fertilizing, side mulching, those kind of things. Also, things like looking for pests, looking for signs of disease, having to prune, all those things are kind of maintenance activities that you will need to regularly do in the garden. So kind of think about those easy to grow, low maintenance type of veggies if you've got a super busy lifestyle. And the wonderful thing now is you can Google some of those things of low maintenance veggies or easy to grow veggies. And even seed suppliers, you can contact them and ask for kind of low maintenance vegetables or those that are easy to grow. And a good tip, if you're not comfortable with reaching out directly to a seed supplier to ask, is to take a look at their best sellers or their staff favourites, because those often tend to be varieties that are grown a lot. They've been ordered a lot. Lots of people in the country that you live in have had great success with growing them. And also take a minute to read the reviews. Lots of seed companies now have reviews available for those varieties, and if you've got a short list of varieties that you're thinking of growing, take a look online and see if you can find out more information about growing them in the review, because there's more and more of that coming available, especially now with so many heirloom varieties being grown, and people don't really know a lot about that particular variety and how it grows in different conditions. Or, as more people get hold of that seed and start to grow it, there's a lot more available now. So you can take a look at those things as well to see if it's going to fit your lifestyle. The next couple of questions I'll talk about together is, does it have resistance to pests in your area? And does it have resistance to diseases in your area? And there's differences in pests and diseases depending on where you are living. So, for example, my family down in Texas have to deal with higher humidity, and they have a higher propensity for fungal diseases because of the humidity down there. Whereas here in Utah, I don't have as much of an issue with those type of diseases because of the drier climate. I have different issues that happen in my garden. Predominantly, there's a certain type of cricket or grasshopper that appears in my garden every year and likes to munch on everything. But my family in Texas don't have those issues. So understanding issues of pests and diseases, whether it's because you've had a garden before and you kind of know what happens there, or reaching out to your local extension office. So many universities have an extension office available, and they can tell you what some of the common pests and diseases in the area are. You can also search for that information on the internet and ask a fellow gardener. Maybe you've got some co-workers that are gardeners and they can tell you what some of those issues are, and then you'll kind of know what's something that you need to look out for in your area when choosing those vegetables to grow. And the same can be said for the varieties that grow well. You can ask your local extension office of what varieties definitely grow well in your area. And you can also ask a gardener what grows well for you. And over the years, I've had many different gardens, obviously in different countries, different states. I've grown lots of different things, and they've all had their different nuances, and things have grown better in different areas than others. So that is definitely something that you need to take into consideration, because if you don't have a lot of time, to really kind of be combing over your garden on a regular basis, looking for pests or diseases, then you're definitely going to want to make sure that you're going to choose varieties that are going to be resistant to those pests and diseases that you do have in your area. It's not to say that the first time that you grow that vegetable that it's going to get attacked by those pests or diseases, but it might, and having a disease or pest resistant variety is going to take away some of that headache and also maybe alleviate some of those maintenance activities a little bit. Not entirely, but definitely a little bit. The next question is it high yielding? So I mentioned that in one of the places that I was growing back in England, I had a really small garden and I was actually growing in containers. So I was looking for something that was going to be high yielding within that space. And I'm going to talk about high yielding and can it provide a continual harvest over a season kind of together because they're very similar. So by high yielding, we mean for one plant, is it going to produce a lot? And you often see this with different varieties. You will get bigger tomatoes, for example, on one tomato plant than another. A cherry tomato is obviously very small, but a beefsteak tomato is very large. But you might get more cherry tomatoes off that one plant than you will beefsteak tomatoes, and a cherry tomato you can harvest continually throughout that growing season. So depending on how you like to grow and your lifestyle, you want to think about vegetables that are going to suit how you are wanting to maintain those plants and what you're going to do with the harvest afterwards. For example, we do a lot of canning here, and I've done a few episodes about that on YouTube and also on the podcast too. So we spend a lot of time canning tomatoes, and we grow enough tomatoes to really see ourselves through with sauce and salsa, for the whole year until, the tomatoes are ready to be harvested and the process starts again. But we like to kind of plan out the varieties that we're going to grow, and we roughly are at the stage now where we know approximately when that harvest is going to be, give or take a couple of weeks because of the weather. But because of that, I know that, mid-June onwards is when I start to see tomato varieties, because I grow different ones to keep us in tomatoes really until the frosts. And that's one way to provide a continual harvest over the season, is by growing different varieties that mature at different rates. But if you're looking for something that is a high yield in one go, then you want to be looking for varieties that are listed as being high yielding, and that might be bigger leaf size. So maybe you're looking at collards, and it might be a variety that's got a larger leaf, or it grows taller to provide a continual harvest of leaves throughout that growing season. And you'll see that information on a lot of catalogues in a lot of online suppliers, and also with all the information that's available. And if you're really unsure about whether this particular variety is going to be suitable for you, honestly, the best advice I can really give is to reach out to the seed supplier and ask them. Obviously, they've got a vested interest because, they're wanting to make that sale. So kind of have that knowledge in the back of your mind that they are wanting to give you the right information to make a sale. So it is in their best interest to give you the right information, because if you're happy with your purchase, then you're likely to come back again. So have a think about, what it is that you really want to be doing with the produce that you're making, and, how you're going to want to harvest that. For some plants, you don't really have a choice, like fruit trees and fruit bushes, for example. They will produce when they're ready, and it will be all in one go, like our blackberries and our fruit trees. There's not a lot of choice that we have in those matters, but we can make sure that we harvest them at the right time, and we put those to good use, whether we're canning them, giving them away to friends, or whatever we plan on doing with those. One of the good benefits of using different varieties to provide a continual harvest over a season is, you get the benefit of extending that harvest over the season. So some of the common plants that people tend to do that with are potatoes and corn, because they mature at different rates. And you have early season, mid-season and late season varieties. So that's going to keep you in potatoes from spring all the way through to fall. Same with corn. You can have different varieties that have got different traits that you're looking at growing there. Let's talk about the next thing of, is it perennial or is it self-seeding? A perennial plant is something that comes back year after year. So blueberries, raspberries, cane fruit are all something that's a perennial, and it's going to grow back every year, and it's going to produce flowers, produce fruit, produce seed. If it's a self-seeding plant, that's typically something that is known as an annual, and they grow once a year. If you let them go to seed, they will produce flowers, they will produce seed, and more often than not they will self-seed, which is where they drop the seed around where they are growing and will come back again the next year. You often see that with flowers. What else? Lettuce does a lot of that as well. And there's a few other plants that will grow and seed all in the same year. There's other plants like carrots and parsnips. They do produce flowers and seed, but they usually do that in the second year, and they're called biennials. And that's what that means. So if you're looking at something that's a perennial, that's going to come back year after year, then where you plant it needs to be where it's going to stay. You don't really want to be digging it up every year, moving it to a different space. Whereas if you've got plants that are self-seeding or annuals, you can decide where they're going to be planted and grown every year, and that's part of your crop rotation plan. Is it native to your area, and is it tolerant of your climate? So I live at a high altitude, and it's hot and it's dry in summer, and it's cold and dry when it's winter. So I've got a very unique climate, like many other people within the Rockies, and there's a difference in the seeds that tolerate that kind of climate versus something that somebody grows in Florida or in Vermont, for example. There is a bit of a difference there. So understanding your climate and what sort of growing season you have is going to help you choose the right seeds. And if plants are native to your area, then they are going to grow better because they're already indigenous to the area that you are growing in. So, for example, there's different types of, sagebush and different wildflowers that are native here in Utah, and within the valley or up in the mountains, that are going to do phenomenally better than me trying to grow something that is not native to the area. Now, that doesn't mean to say that plants that aren't native aren't going to grow. Just native plants will obviously grow a bit better because that's the climate and the conditions that they are used to growing in. The other thing about asking is if it is native to your area, and this probably more applies to a perennial type of fruit and vegetables, or even herbs actually, is whether you are allowed to grow it. So non-native plants may have issues with it being destructive in terms of that it can grow and spread and take over things. A good example is Japanese knotweed in the UK. You are not allowed to grow it. You're not allowed to cultivate it because it is an invasive species. Getting tongue-tied today. but that is something that you want to check with your local extension office. And sometimes even people have that listed within their city ordinances. Certainly here in the US, I know where I'm located, the city ordinances provide a list of invasive species that you are not allowed to grow. So that's something to really consider if you're buying in plants from a different state. States have different regulations. You might not be able to import potatoes if you live in one state, or onions. There are typically things that have importation restrictions on them. Same if you're buying seeds or plants from another country, they might actually have importation restrictions on those as well. So do some due diligence and check before you order. Make sure that you check if you're ordering online, have a look at the FAQs and the shipping, because they often have a list of states that they won't ship certain items to, so it can save you a bit of headache there. And if you can't get a variety that you're wanting from that supplier, you could try a different supplier, and again contact your extension office and see if they can provide you with some information of where to get it locally. You might be able to find it from a local small nursery or something like that. Next question is, will it be able to produce in my growing season? I alluded to this a little bit when discussing is it tolerant of your climate, because climate and producing in your growing season often go hand in hand. And by your growing season, I'm meaning the days to maturity for plants. So on the back of a seed packet, or as you're searching for your seeds to grow, often, but not always, but often, it says on there days to maturity, and this is the number of days it takes for that plant to reach maturity to start producing a harvest. And it's a rough estimate, and they are in peak prime growing conditions, so there is going to be a bit of a difference in your area and your climate, and it does vary season to season. But for example, you want to be making sure that the plants that you're wanting to grow have a number of days to maturity which is less than your growing season. And to find out how long your growing season is, you can just search that on the internet. You can search by your postcode. You can search by your city or your state, and there's differences within a state. I will put that out there. So where I live is a zone 7A, but somebody that lives 40 miles away from me might be at a different elevation, and their zone is 5. So they actually have a shorter growing season than what I do, even though I live in a more northern part of the state than somebody else. So that is something to watch out for, and the easiest way to do it is really to search, and you can check the USDA to find out what your growing season is if you're based within the US. You can also do it by your first frost date and your last frost date. So your last frost date is the last frost in spring, and your first frost is your first frost in fall. And you can search both of those to find out when your frost date is, and you can just count the days between your last frost in spring and your first frost in fall, and find out how many days that is. So let's say that you have a frost date that is quite late, so it goes all the way up to middle of May, and then you have a frost in October. You can count those days and find out how many days you have of a growing season. It does vary, so the more north that you go up the hemisphere, your growing season gets shorter because you have frosts much earlier and winter hangs around a lot later. Where I live, it's about 110, 120 days of growing that I have. So I know that I need to be choosing produce that is going to be less than 120 days. I typically aim for things that are 90 days or less to make sure that I've got a bit of a buffer. But if you live in, somewhere more northern, and you have a shorter growing season, look for varieties that are ideal for short season, cold climates, because they're going to have a shorter number of days to maturity. So I wouldn't be able to grow melons with a really long growing season that take 130 days plus to mature, for example. But I would be able to grow melons that could take anywhere from 65 to 100 days to grow. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. But understanding how many days you have for your growing season really helps to drive you choosing the produce that's going to grow in that time. And that's a lot of where I do my selection of, what we're going to be growing is based on what my growing season is, how many days it's going to take to mature, as well as whether my family and I really want to eat it. So those are things that are quite important, and understanding those really can help you have the best out of your garden. And the last two that I talked about is, does it have ornamental value, such as pretty flowers or leaves or fruit, and does it provide ornamental value when dormant, such as coloured bark or leaves? Those are really geared to those of us who are trying to grow food in an urban setting, and if you've got issues where you've got to keep it up with the neighbours, maybe you've got ordinances or HOA stuff that kind of really governs what you can or can't grow in your yard, then those aspects are really important to somebody. Like, is it going to look pretty within that edible landscape? Can I mix these things in with the flowers and it's still going to provide that curb appeal? Lots of plants have an ornamental value and are still edible. Herbs, for example, very pretty to look at. They've got nice flowers, they're scented, but it's not just limited to herbs. You could also have highly ornamental plants growing that are edible too. So orish or mountain spinach, that's something that I talked about on YouTube, and it was this beautiful, like, burgundy coloured leaves, and it just looked really pretty next to something that was very green. And there's different varieties that you can choose that have got these pretty colours. Swiss chard comes in a variety of different stem colours that can look very striking when mixed with flowers in a ornamental border. Same with peppers. I mean, you can get multicolored pepper plants, 5-color Chinese peppers I grew, and they were all these different colors, and they were very vibrant colors as well, and they looked absolutely beautiful growing, and they would equally look beautiful in a ornamental bed. But for a lot of people, trying to blend not only ornamental herbaceous plants that are growing in their garden, but also making it productive and being able to grow food or medicinal herbs and things in there, can really make quite a difference. So those two are obviously a very unique situation and might not apply to you and how you're trying to grow. And another thing to really think about when you're planning your garden and choosing the seeds to grow is, what's the goal for your garden? Are you trying to just grow a few herbs and veggies because you want to learn how? Or are you really wanting to go down that path of a more self-sufficient garden and being able to rely a lot more on homegrown produce, and you're looking to take ownership of your food supply? Because if those goals are really important to you, particularly the bigger ones about being more self-sufficient, then you want to be thinking a lot about where some of your calorie crops are going to be coming in. So calorie crops are things like grains, there are potatoes, amaranth, corn, sweet potatoes, Jerusalem artichokes or sunchokes, wheat, quinoa, oats, winter squash and beans. Those kind of things are going to be the bulk of where your calories are going to be coming from. And then you want crops that are going to be a source of vitamins and minerals, and and there are things like your leafy greens like chard, kale, cabbage, onions, garlic, beets, carrots. Those things are all going to be able to provide a diverse source of vitamins and minerals and things that you and your body are going to need. And thinking about those long-term goals of your garden and what you're wanting to achieve from this season in your garden are going to help you to think about what it is that you're going to be growing and help keep that focus. So if you're just starting, maybe you just want to be able to grow some tomatoes and basil so you can make your own tomato sauce for a couple of meals one night. Or maybe you want to grow a salsa garden so you can make your own homegrown salsa and be able to can it. Or maybe you've just got a little window box and you really want to grow your own herbs this season. Or perhaps it's not even something about growing food that you're wanting to do. Maybe you just want to be able to grow herbs and flowers that are going to attract pollinators to your garden, and you want to provide food for the bees. There's lots of different reasons why we all want to grow a garden, and really nailing down that list of what's important to you and your garden situation is going to really help you decide and drive the right seeds to choose. So I'm going to wrap up by going through the list one more time. So let's go down with, what do you like to eat? So remember, there's no point in growing plants that you hate. It takes up valuable growing space from those plants which you love. Okay, when it comes to space, make sure that you're going to be growing and choosing plants that have the ability to grow in the space that you've got. So if you're short on space, think about those bush varieties and those container varieties, because they're going to be smaller, and we're seeing so many more smaller varieties coming up now, including tiny tomatoes. So you really need to think about space, because plants need space to grow, and having the right spacing between plants promotes good, healthy plants, because you have airflow around them that helps reduce diseases like mildew and blight. What grows in your region? So there's lots of varieties that are available, and some grow particularly well in different regions. Sometimes the region is in their name, like Catskills Brussels sprouts, North Georgia candy roaster squash. Others might have information in the description in the catalogue as being ideal for a certain area, like painted mountain corn, for example, that's good for high altitudes. Again, your local extension office, if you're here in the US, will likely have information about varieties that grow well in the area, and there's also lots of seed companies that have got adapted seeds to the region. Especially if you're going for heirloom varieties or native seeds, you can often get those that are very reliable for your region. And also check out the USDA website to find out what your growing zone is, and lots of places online actually allow you to search for seeds and plants that are going to grow based on that growing zone. make sure you understand and know how long your growing season is. So find out your last average frost date in spring and count the days to your first average frost date in fall, and that's going to give you your growing season, your approximate growing season, so you know that is the maximum number of days that you have, and try to select vegetables and fruit that is going to be shorter than that. Okay, so remember, if your growing season is 90 days, you don't want to try growing something that's going to take 120 days to mature. You want to look for northern or short season varieties which are going to mature in a much shorter amount of time. I will put a link to a neat tool that I like to use to figure out how long my growing season is, and you can check that out to help figure out how long your season is. Pest and disease resistance. If you know that there's certain problems in the area with certain pests or diseases like, aphids, cornworm, mosaic virus, powdery mildew, blight, then consider growing varieties that are resistant to those problems and help cut down the amount of time that you're going to need to be really looking after those plants if those problems are common. And, lastly, kind of think about what can you really care for, and that time available to grow a garden. If your plants need to be started indoors but you don't have the space to do that, that might not be a good variety for you to grow right now, but maybe you could consider some of the plants that are able to be grown in a winter sowing, and you can check out that episode that I did. I will link that up in the show notes. That might be something for you to try, because you can start the seeds outdoors. You don't need any special equipment to get those going. And look for easy to grow, easy to care for varieties, and those that are the best sellers or staff favourites. They're often a very good variety to try. And last but not least, really have fun when you're choosing the seeds to grow in your garden, and don't be afraid to try something new, right? Even if it is something that you grow and you don't love it, you could donate that seed to a seed swap, and you could try something else. Most towns or cities have some sort of seed swap event, and you can, find those out by doing a bit of research on the internet to find ones in your area. Or if there isn't one, you could start one yourself. Maybe start one with co-workers or friends, and just swap some seeds and get something else to try, and try something new. And that's really the wonderful thing about gardening is it is supposed to be fun, and don't be afraid of trying something new and exciting, and just trying to grow it because you love the look of it, because that's how you're going to find a variety which maybe you prefer to eat, or maybe it grows so much better in your garden than a variety that a neighbour recommended, and you won't know unless you try. If you like this episode and you want to learn more, then sign up below for the Grow Your Own Food Academy and start your journey to growing your own food. And this is going to be the registration to sign up to know when this course is going to go live. This is going to be something that is only going to be live for a short period of time, and it's going to help you grow delicious organic vegetables without breaking the bank, so you can know exactly how your food is raised with your own bare hands. And I'm going to help you step by step all of the way. So sign up for the Grow Your Own Food Academy by clicking the link in the description of this podcast. Until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I'll see you on the next episode.